It's Thursday, August 7th. Wall Street is open for business, and today's big number is $17 billion. That's how much Bank of America will reportedly pay the Justice Department to clear up allegations that BOA was involved in the fraudulent selling of toxic mortgage-backed securities. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Franzen in New York, here with the details of this record-setting deal. Rick Newman. Good morning, Rick.
Hi, Michelle.
Well, first of all, we should say this deal is not quite official, but seems to be all worked out on paper, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And the Bank of America and the Justice Department have been haggling for months over the amount that Bank of America is likely to pay to settle these claims. They were closer to $13 billion, and the Justice Department said that wasn't enough. And the question was, well, was the government basically just going to file a lawsuit against the Bank of America, which the bank clearly doesn't want, or was it going to get them to raise the number in terms of the penalties they were willing to pay? And it appears that Bank of America has agreed to pay more in penalties. It could still unravel. There are lots and lots of details here, and it's not official yet, but it appears to be getting closer to some kind of deal.
And initially, Bank of America was said to be strenuously fighting the government on making this kind of settlement. So what caused BOA to sort of back down or come to the table?
They probably really don't want a lawsuit. And of course, there's a lot of brinkmanship going on behind the scenes. That's been the case with other big banks such as JP Morgan Chase. Obviously, they want the best deal they can get. On the other hand, the government really needs to show that it is being tough against the banks. Bank of America and its two important units, Countrywide Financial and Merrill Lynch, that it acquired in 2008. They were really the two firms that were issuing the huge majority of these so-called toxic waste assets, mortgage-backed securities back then. And the Justice Department just wants to act like it's actually getting some justice here. This is the last of the big banks to undergo a sort of deal like this, and you kind of get the feeling that the government wants to have kind of a crescendo climax to this whole event and finally say, look, we did get some money back for U.S. taxpayers. We did have justice served, and we did what we were supposed to.
Give us a little bit more details behind the scenes, what role the toxic mortgage-backed securities had in the 2008 recession. And Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders points out in USA Today that the Bank of America received nearly $1 trillion in those extremely low-interest loans during the federal bailout.
Right. It's worth asking, what is this all about anyway? Because it's actually, at this point, it happened kind of a long time ago. But what went on here is these were all the mortgages that probably never should have been granted in the first place, with mortgages given to people who had undocumented income, maybe had no income. They were underwritten very poorly. They did not account for bad credit risks. And these get bundled into mortgage-backed securities. That's a fairly routine part of the financial sector. Nothing is unusual about that. The problem was that nobody correctly labeled how risky these mortgages was. So a lot of investors thought they were buying top shelf mortgages. Many of these had credit ratings of AAA, which is the top rating, and they were nowhere near AAA. So somebody along the way misled investors about what was going on in there. And we're talking about billions and billions, in fact, almost $1 trillion of these mortgage-backed securities issued by Bank of America and these two other entities it now owns. So when all those mortgages started to default, this just led to cascading losses, and it's why we almost had a depression and a genuine financial crisis in 2008. So all of these things directly contributed and, in fact, caused the financial crisis back then. And we know that nobody has really gone to jail. No big fish, anyway, have really gone to jail over this. So the government's trying to do the next best thing, which is get these multi-billion-dollar payments from the banks.
And of course, as you mentioned, Bank of America wouldn't be the first to pay these huge fines related to the 2008 financial crisis. The Wall Street Journal tweeted out a list of who's paid what. Take a look at those. Those are some pretty big numbers.
Yeah, and we did a tally here. Putting aside private lawsuits, which are billions of dollars more, we're getting close to $100 billion that just the handful of big banks will now have paid the government, paid state governments, and paid back to consumers in fines and penalties and other things going back. I mean, this is really adding up to a lot of money. It's being spread across all the different states, and it's not going to any one single entity, but the banks are paying a lot of money here.
And so, we're still slowly recovering from the 2008 recession. And no matter how much money these banks and other institutions might have to pay, has the government taken enough steps to make sure something like this financial crisis, doesn't happen
This is
again?
one of those things that obviously depends on who you ask. But I think the Obama administration would say, sure, we've done a lot to make sure this doesn't happen again. We've passed the Dodd-Frank regulations, which constrain the types of risks banks can take. Regulators such as the Federal Reserve are really clamping down on banks. They're getting inside the banks, checking their books, making them go back, do it over. They have to have these wind down plans to make sure that if they fail, they can go through bankruptcy in an orderly way without requiring more bailouts. And you know what usually happens, Michelle, is when we have problems like this, we actually usually do a pretty good job of making sure the problem we just had doesn't happen again. The real question is, what's the next problem going to be? We probably don't know. The seeds are probably being planted right now. Somebody's cutting corners. Somebody is finding clever ways to take some additional risk that maybe they shouldn't be. This is sort of the history of financial crises. It's always the thing you don't anticipate that causes the next problem. And I think that's the thing to be paying attention to at this point.
Good point. Rick Newman from Yahoo Finance, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle.
And you, of course, can keep up with the latest headlines right here on abcnews.com. You've been watching The Big Number. I'm Michelle Franzen in New York.